Okay, so we've got this really interesting collection of material you folks sent in, all focused on the cloud.
Yeah, it's a term we hear constantly.
Exactly. Let's dive right in, because I mean, cloud might sound a bit abstract, but what these sources really hammer home is that it's probably the single biggest change in computing over the last, what, 20 years.
Easily. It's completely reshaped how things are done.
So our mission here, basically, is to pull out the really crucial stuff from everything shared, make it
Mhm.
clear, and, hopefully pretty engaging too.
Sounds good. And at its heart, when we talk cloud, it's really a fundamental shift, isn't it? It's about how we get access to computer power and storage.
Right, instead of the old way, buying and running your own physical servers.
hmm The cloud model is basically renting that infrastructure over the internet.
Yeah, one of the sources used an analogy I thought was spot on, like renting an apartment versus owning a house.
Yeah, that's a good one.
We all kind of get why renting works. Right. It's often cheaper up front, it's flexible if you need to move, and crucially, you're not, like, personally fixing the boiler when it breaks.
Exactly. No maintenance headaches.
And that feels very true for the cloud, too, doesn't it? That comparison.
It's a remarkably good fit, actually. A renting, yeah, in both cases gives you that mix of affordability, flexibility, and freedom from, the hassle of ownership and upkeep. That's pretty much the core value the cloud brought to computing.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Think about how things were before the cloud, before, say, 2006. The sources call it the dark ages of computing, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, a bit dramatic maybe, but it highlights the difference. Back then, yeah, if a company wanted to run software, email, databases, websites, whatever, they had no choice, really.
They had to buy their own servers,
Yeah.
physical machines.
Absolutely. Picture these powerful computers, the servers, right? Usually mounted in racks
Okay.
and often housed in special rooms, sometimes whole buildings, data centers, climate controlled, secure.
Right? Rows and rows of humming racks. You see pictures of them.
That physical gear was the foundation, the absolute requirement for corporate computing.
And the cost. I mean, the sources talk about millions of dollars just to set up a data center.
Oh, easily. Just for the hardware. And that's before you even think about the power bills, the cooling, the network gear, the specialist staff needed to run it all.
Wow. So a massive upfront investment, what finance people call CapEx, right? Capital expenditure.
Precisely. Huge CapEx. It really created a high barrier to entry, especially if you were a smaller company or a startup. That initial cost, plus the ongoing operational costs, big hurdles.
Then comes 2006. And sources point to Amazon, Amazon, the bookstore company launching AWS, Amazon Web Services.
A total game changer.
What was the big idea there? What did they actually do?
Well, the core concept was surprisingly simple, but just completely revolutionary at the time. Instead of making companies buy servers,
Yep.
AWS started renting out server capacity by the hour, accessible over the internet. Their first big service, Elastic Compute Cloud EC2, basically let businesses tap into Amazon's own huge infrastructure whenever they needed it.
So back to the apartment analogy, it's like Amazon built these enormous apartment buildings, their data centers,
Right.
and then let anyone rent just the space, the computing power they needed, paying as they go.
Exactly that. Pay only for what you use. It was transformative. That word gets overused, but here.
Yeah, it feels right. Because suddenly, startups or even established companies could get access to serious computing power without that crippling upfront cost.
Absolutely. That was huge. But there are other benefits too.
Like what?
Well, incredible flexibility, or agility as they
Right.
often call it. Need more power for a big launch. Scale up instantly. Traffic dies down. Scale back down. You couldn't do that easily with physical servers.
Right, you'd have bought too much hardware, just in case.
Exactly. Over-provisioning. Very expensive. Plus, it reduced the fear of vendor lock-in.
Yeah.
Being stuck with one hardware supplier. In theory, you could switch cloud providers more easily.
Now, an important point the sources make is that cloud isn't always cheaper overall, necessarily.
Right. That's a common misconception.
It's more about shifting how you pay.
Mm-hmm.
From that big chunk of CapEx for buying hardware
Mm-hmm.
to OpEx, operating expenses, paying for what you use, like a utility bill.
Mm-hmm.
How does that change things for a company?
Well, that CapEx to OpEx shift gives huge financial agility. You're not tying up massive amounts of cash and hardware that, loses value over time.
Okay.
You can use that money elsewhere. R&D, marketing, hiring, whatever. It also makes budgeting, well, maybe more predictable month to month, even if the total cost over years could be higher sometimes.
Got it. Now, terminology. The sources mention on-prem. What's that?
Yeah, on-prem, it's just short for on-premise. It means the traditional way of running your own servers and your own data centers on your own premises.
Okay, the old way.
Right. And this is where it sometimes got confusing because companies might even internally call their own data centers their private cloud.
Okay.
Which is why the term public cloud became important to specifically mean services like AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, the ones anyone can rent over the public internet.
Right, so on-prem is doing it yourself. Public cloud is renting from the big guys like AWS. Okay. Now, the sources also break down cloud services into three main types or flavors: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS.
Infrastructure, platform, and software as a service.
Can we walk through those, maybe using that apartment analogy again?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with IaaS, infrastructure as a service. This is the most basic level.
Okay.
The cloud provider gives you the fundamental building blocks, virtual servers for compute power, storage for data, and networking to connect it all.
So in the apartment analogy,
All right.
is IaaS like renting an empty plot of land?
Yeah.
You get the space, the basic utilities hookups maybe, but you have to build the house yourself.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's the bare essentials. You get maximum control, you choose the operating system, install all your own software, configure everything.
And examples would be?
Things like AWS EC2, which is the compute part, AWS EVS for block storage, or Route 53 for networking DNS stuff, the raw infrastructure pieces.
Got it. Foundational layer. So what's next? Platform as a service, PaaS.
Right, PaaS builds on top of IaaS. The provider still manages the underlying infrastructure, the servers, the storage, the network.
Okay.
But they also provide extra tools and services on top, things that make it easier to develop, deploy, and manage your applications.
So sticking with the analogy, an unfurnished apartment. The building's there, walls, roof, plumbing. But you bring the furniture and decide how to use the rooms.
Exactly. The basic structure and some core services are provided, but you customize it. PaaS takes away some of the lower-level management hassle compared to IaaS.
What kind of hassle?
Like managing the operating system updates or dealing with the underlying databases or middleware, PaaS services handle that for you.
So developers can just focus on writing their code.
Pretty much. It speeds things up. Sometimes the IaaS providers offer PaaS too, like AWS has RDS for managed databases. Other times, third-party companies build PaaS solutions on top of IaaS, like Heroku or the source mentioned Elastic running on AWS.
Okay, so IaaS is land, PaaS is an unfurnished apartment. Which brings us to the top layer. Software as a service, SaaS. This sounds like the one most people use directly.
That's right. SaaS is a complete, ready-to-use application delivered over the cloud. In our analogy, this is the fully furnished apartment.
Move-in ready.
Exactly. Move-in ready, you just sign up and start using it. You don't worry about the infrastructure, the platform, the software updates, maintenance, none of it. The provider handles everything.
And examples we'd know.
Oh, tons.
Yeah.
You mentioned Substack earlier. That's SaaS, Twitter, Salesforce, Google Workspace, or Microsoft 365, Gmail. Even things like Adobe Photoshop, if you subscribe through their Creative Cloud.
Right. All apps you access online, basically.
Usually through a web browser or a dedicated app, but you're not installing and managing the core software yourself.
That apartment analogy really helps clear it up.
Right.
IaaS, size, kind of a spectrum of control versus convenience. Land, unfurnished, fully furnished.
Yeah, it maps pretty well.
Now, the sources also talked about how cloud gets used in just like everyday business chat. It seems to mean different things to different people.
It really does, because it covers that whole spectrum. From IaaS to SaaS, you need context. The sources give some good examples of decoding that business speak.
Let's run through a couple. Okay, someone says, the shift to the cloud has been transformative for our business. What are they likely getting at?
Usually in that kind of broad statement, they mean they've moved a lot of their core IT operations off their own on-prem servers and onto a public cloud provider like AWS or Azure. The transformative bit usually refers to, saving time and money by not having to build and run those data centers themselves anymore. Faster innovation, maybe.
Right. Okay, here's a more specific one. We deploy our software on AWS and use their PaaS for our databases.
Ah, see, that's clear. It tells you they're using AWS infrastructure, probably EC2, the IaaS part, to run their application code. And they're using an AWS platform service, likely RDS, the managed database service, so they don't have to manage the database servers directly. It specifies how they're using the cloud.
Got it. Okay, next. Our CSO is afraid of public cloud, so we still run everything in our own data centers. CSO being Chief Security Officer.
Yeah, this points to security concerns. Especially earlier on, there was more skepticism about putting sensitive data on servers run by someone else.
Understandable, I guess.
Sure. So this company is sticking with the on-prem model, though it's worth noting, as the sources do, that major public cloud providers like AWS invest massively in security, often way more than a single company could afford.
So the security might actually be better in the public cloud sometime.
It often is, yeah. The capabilities are pretty sophisticated now, but the perception or specific compliance needs might still keep some companies on-prem.
Interesting. Okay, how about we're doing a hybrid cloud model to reduce our risk?
Hybrid cloud just means using a mix.
Yeah.
Some stuff runs in the public cloud like AWS or Azure, and some stuff still runs on their own private on-prem servers.
I do that.
Various reasons. Maybe regulations require certain data to stay in-house. Maybe they have legacy systems that are hard to move. Maybe it's just a gradual migration. It's about finding a balance, cost, control, performance, risk.
Right, not all or nothing.
Right.
And finally, we never store your data in the cloud so we can keep things private and secure.
Here, cloud is probably being used in more general sense, meaning on internet servers we don't control.
Okay.
So they're saying the data stays purely on the user's own device. Like, it's not uploaded to Dropbox or Google Drive or some application's backend servers. It implies local storage only for privacy reasons.
Yeah, these examples really show how you need to listen carefully to what someone means when they just say the cloud. It's definitely not one single thing.
Not at all. Context is key.
So as we start to wrap this deep dive up,
Yeah.
what are the biggest takeaways we should pull from all this?
I think the core things are understanding that fundamental shift from owning servers to renting infrastructure.
Right. The apartment analogy.
Yeah, the big benefits that brought financial flexibility, getting rid of huge upfront costs, speed, scalability, and then knowing those three main models: IaaS, PaaS, SaaS.
Infrastructure, platform, software, land unfurnished, furnished.
Exactly. And just remembering that cloud covers that whole range. It's a spectrum, not a single point.
And the market itself. The sources mentioned AWS is still the biggest player and really profitable for Amazon.
They had a huge head start. But the competition is fierce now. Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud are major players, investing heavily and growing fast.
What does that competition mean for users?
Mostly good things, actually. It pushes innovation, drives prices down, leads to more specialized services. It also encourages this trend of multi-cloud.
Using more than one provider.
Yeah. Companies might use AWS for some things, Azure for others, maybe Google Cloud too, to avoid putting all their eggs in one basket, or just to use the best service for a specific job from each provider gives them leverage too.
Makes sense. And we touched on regulated industries like finance or healthcare being a bit slower to jump into public cloud.
They were initially,
Yeah.
because of strict rules about data security, privacy, where data can physically reside. But the cloud providers have worked hard on that. They offer special compliant environments, certifications, features specifically for those industries.
Yeah.
So adoption there is definitely picking up now, even if it's sometimes more hybrid than fully public.
Well, this has been incredibly helpful, I think. Really clarified what could have felt like a kind of fuzzy concept, thanks to the sources you all sent in.
Yeah, good material to work with.
So here's something to maybe leave our listeners chewing on, building on all this. Given how much we now rely on these cloud services, for almost everything,
Yeah.
what do you see as maybe the biggest potential future challenges or opportunities, in this space? Not just for companies, but maybe for the whole economy. Definitely something to think about as this cloud keeps evolving.
Yeah. That's a big question. Lots to consider there. It's definitely not standing still.
Indeed. Well, thanks for navigating this deep dive with us.
My pleasure.
Until our next exploration.